Starfleet has cataloged thousands of species, mapped anomalies that bend space and time, and sent its finest minds to the edges of the known galaxy. But what happens when something appears that defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? What happens when the Enterprise encounters not an alien civilization, not a spatial phenomenon, but a man, a single man, moving through the vacuum of space at a velocity that should be physically impossible? That question was about to be answered. If you want to see more crossover stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and drop a character name in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The USS Enterprise NCC 1701 was running a survey corridor along the outer boundary of the Mutara sector, her warp engines cycling at a comfortable warp 5. It was the kind of mission that filled log entries with dry scientific notation. Stellar cartography updates, routine subspace relay maintenance, a mapping correction for a binary system that had drifted 2 degrees off Federation charts. Admiral James T. Kirk had accepted the assignment because Starfleet brass had decided he needed something quiet after the Enterprise's last deployment. Quiet, they said. Routine. Kirk stood at the center of the bridge with his arms crossed and the particular expression he wore when he suspected the universe was about to prove Starfleet brass wrong. Chekhov. Kirk's voice was level. Run that reading again. Pavel Chekhov swiveled from his navigation console, his young face carrying an expression caught somewhere between professional composure and genuine alarm. Admiral, sensors are reading a biological life form traveling at warp point 94. No vessel. No propulsion signature. No life support equipment of any kind. Hikaru Sulu turned from the helm. Sir, that's not possible. Apparently no one told it that, Kirk said. On the main view screen, against the deep star-salted black of the Mutara sector, something was moving. At first it registered as debris, a small object tumbling in the void. But debris didn't course correct. Debris didn't slow down. Whatever was out there had decelerated from near warp velocity with the casual ease of a man slowing his stride, and it was now holding position approximately 200 meters off the Enterprise's port bow. It was a person. The figure wore red and blue, colors that had no business existing this far from any inhabited world. A cape moved in the residual wake of his own deceleration as though responding to a wind that didn't exist in space. He was looking directly at the view screen. Directly at the bridge. Directly, it seemed, at Kirk. Spock. Kirk didn't raise his voice. Commander Spock was already at his science station, his face pressed to the hooded viewer, his long fingers working the sensor controls with the precise economy of motion that always made the process look like a kind of music. He straightened after 11 seconds, Kirk counted, which meant whatever Spock had found required the additional time. Fascinating, Spock said, with the particular inflection he reserved for things that genuinely surprised him. The entity is humanoid. Bipedal. Carbon-based. His cellular structure is extraordinary. Every cell appears to be absorbing and storing radiant energy from the local yellow star at a rate that exceeds anything in Federation biological records by a factor of approximately 4,000. He paused. He is breathing, Admiral. In vacuum. Can we establish communication? Lieutenant Uhura was already working her board. Standard hailing frequencies, sir. Trying Universal Translator bootstrap. She stopped. Looked up. Admiral. He's knocking. Kirk blinked. He's what? Knocking on the hull, sir. 3 times. Very gently. She touched her earpiece. The vibration pattern through the hull plating, it's deliberate. Almost polite. The bridge held a silence that felt like a collectively held breath. Kirk looked at the view screen for a long moment. The figure outside waited with his arms at his sides, his expression patient and calm and entirely at ease in a vacuum that would kill every human being on this ship in under a minute. Kirk straightened his jacket. Open a channel. The communication channel produced a half-second of carrier static before a voice came through, clear, unhurried, carrying the slight echo of open space transmission even through the hull vibration pickup. "My name is Clark Kent." A pause. "I realize that's not the most dramatic introduction given the circumstances. I'm from another universe. I'm aware of how that sounds. Your ship's drive signature was the first organized technology I've detected since I crossed through what I can only describe as a dimensional barrier near your galactic rim." Another pause, shorter this time. "I'm not a threat. I was hoping we might talk." Kirk looked at Spock. Spock looked at Kirk. "Bring him aboard," Kirk said. "Transporter room 3. Full medical and security presence." He moved toward the turbolift. "And someone tell Dr. McCoy to prepare for the most unusual physical examination of his career." Transporter room 3 had never felt small before. The chamber was standard Enterprise configuration: 3 pads, a console, a ceiling high enough to accommodate most Federation species on record. It felt small now because of the man standing on the center pad, and it had nothing to do with his physical dimensions. Clark Kent stood at parade rest, hands loose at his sides, and watched the room with an attentiveness that wasn't threatening so much as total. His eyes moved across the bulkheads, the ceiling fixtures, the transporter console, the 4 security officers positioned at the walls with phasers set to heavy stun, and then settled on Kirk with the patient focus of someone who had already assessed every variable and decided none of them were particularly concerning. He hadn't flinched when the transporter beam took him. He'd simply stood on the pad outside, nodded once toward the hull as though acknowledging an invitation, and materialized with the easy composure of a man stepping through a familiar door. Dr. Leonard McCoy stood to Kirk's left with a medical tricorder running and an expression that suggested he was reconsidering several foundational assumptions about biology. "Cellular energy density is off every chart I have," McCoy said, not quite under his breath. "His musculature reads like it's under constant low-level compression. Like every cell is spring-loaded." He lowered the tricorder and looked up. "I don't know what you are, son, but you are not what my instruments were designed for." "I get that a lot," Clark said. His voice in person carried the same unhurried quality it had over the calm channel. "I'm Kryptonian. Last survivor of a planet called Krypton, which no longer exists in my universe and I'm fairly certain never existed in yours." He looked at Spock, who had entered behind Kirk and was already running his own scanner with the expression of a man trying to drink an ocean through a straw. "Your biology is Vulcan, if I'm reading the micro details correctly. The cranial structure, the skin tone, the deliberate emotional suppression. I've read some Vulcan philosophy. Your people's logic has always impressed me." Spock lowered his scanner 4 millimeters. "You are familiar with Vulcan culture. In my universe, I make it a point to understand everyone I might work alongside." Clark met Spock's gaze directly. "Or everyone who might need help." Kirk stepped forward. He had faced Q, negotiated with Klingon war chiefs, stared down the Gorn on a planet with nothing but rocks and his own ingenuity. He was not easily impressed by presence alone. But there was something about this man that required a recalibration, not of threat assessment, but of category. Clark Kent didn't fit into any category Kirk had. "You said you crossed a dimensional barrier," Kirk said. "From your universe to ours. Near what I think you'd call the galactic rim. Something tore open." "A spatial rupture of a kind I've encountered before, though never exactly like this one. I went through because something came through first. A fragment of Phantom Zone crystal, a Kryptonian prison construct. It's dangerous if it remains loose in an unfamiliar universe." He paused. "I lost it somewhere in your galaxy. I've been searching." "How long have you been in our universe?" 11 days, by your calendar reckoning. I've been navigating by stellar cartography. Your star positions are close enough to my universes that I can orient myself, but the political geography is completely different." A slight shift in his expression, something that might have been dry humor. "No metropolis. No daily planet. No one who knows my name. It has been a strange 11 days. McCoy muttered something that sounded like an agreement. Spock clasped his hands behind his back. Your propulsion mechanism. You were traveling at approximately warp 0.94 under your own biological power. The energy expenditure required for that velocity, sustained across 11 days of transit. I absorbed solar radiation and convert it, Clark said. Yellow stars in particular. The physics are slightly different in your universe. I'm running at maybe 85% of what I'd consider normal capacity. Something about the dimensional crossing. Chronoton interference, I think, based on the residual readings I was detecting from the barrier. He looked at his own hand briefly, flexed it once. It's been fading. Another few hours near your sun and I'll be fully acclimated. Fascinating, Spock said. This time the word carried a weight that meant he had moved from professional assessment into something closer to genuine scientific wonder. Kirk studied Clark for a long moment. 20 years of command had given him an instinct for deception that had saved his life more times than he could catalog. He was reading Clark Kent the way he read every unknown, looking for the gap between the presented self and the actual self, the tell that revealed what someone was hiding behind what they were showing. He found almost nothing. What he found instead was a peculiar consistency. A man whose surface and interior seemed to be largely the same thing, which in Kirk's experience was either the mark of extraordinary honesty or extraordinary skill at concealment. Kirk decided provisionally on honesty. Mr. Spock will want to continue his scans. Dr. McCoy will want to run a full examination, which I suspect will frustrate him considerably. Kirk allowed the faintest edge of a smile. And then I'd like you to join me in my quarters for a briefing. There are things about this sector you should know before we go any further. Clark nodded. I appreciate the hospitality, Admiral. He glanced at McCoy. I'll try to cooperate with the examination. Fair warning, hyposprays generally don't penetrate my skin. McCoy stared at him. Generally? McCoy said. Generally, Clark confirmed, with what was definitely a slight smile. From across the room, Spock made a small notation in his scanner log and said nothing. But Kirk, who had known Spock for 2 decades, recognized the particular quality of silence that meant his science officer had just become very, very interested in something. The briefing lasted 40 minutes. Kirk laid out the Matara sector's recent history with the economy of a man who had learned that the most important information delivered fastest saved the most lives. Clark sat across the desk in Kirk's quarters and listened the way he did everything, completely, without interruption, his eyes steady and his expression shifting in small precise increments that tracked the weight of what he was hearing. When Kirk finished, Clark was quiet for a moment. The eugenics wars, Clark said. Genetic engineering used to create a superior human subspecies. Engineered for strength, intelligence, strategic thinking, emotional intensity. He paused. And the survivors were exiled in sleeper ships. The ones we could find, Kirk said. Khan Noonien Singh was the most dangerous of them. We encountered him 15 years ago. The Enterprise found his sleeper ship, the SS Botany Bay, drifting in deep space. Khan woke up, attempted to take the ship, nearly succeeded. Kirk's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We marooned him and his people on Ceti Alpha V. A harsh world, but survivable. The intention was rehabilitation. Autonomy. A chance to build something. But you've had no contact since. Starfleet classified the location. Khan was considered contained. Kirk stood, moved to the viewport, and looked out at the star field with the expression of a man revisiting a decision he had never fully made peace with. I've wondered, over the years, whether I made the right call. Whether I was too lenient. Whether I was too harsh. He turned. Spock believed it was a reasonable outcome. I'm not sure I ever fully agreed with Spock. Clark looked at him steadily. You gave him a chance to be something other than what he was built to be. And we don't know if he took it. The silence between them held for exactly 3 seconds before it was broken by the ship. The sound that came through the bulkhead was subtle, a change in the harmonic frequency of the Enterprise's superstructure that most civilians would never notice. Clark noticed it before the comm panel chimed. He was already turning toward the door when Uhura's voice came through. "Bridge to Admiral Kirk. Sir, long-range sensors are picking up an anomalous contact. Bearing 27 Mark 4, approximately 40 million kilometers. The computer is having difficulty classifying it. Kirk was already moving. On my way." Clark followed without being asked, and Kirk didn't tell him to stay behind. Some instincts operated below the level of regulation. On the bridge, Chekhov had the contact on the main viewer. A smear of light against the dark, too small and too cold to be a vessel under power, tumbling slowly in the gravitational pull of the sector's outer debris field. Spock was at his station with both hands on the console, running deep spectrum analysis with the focused intensity of a man who had already seen something in the data that he hadn't yet said aloud. "Report," Kirk said. "A vessel, Admiral," Spock said. "Ancient by current construction standards. Pre-Federation hull alloys. No active power signature. The reactor has been in standby mode for an extended period. Life sign readings are present but suppressed, consistent with suspended animation." He straightened from the viewer. His voice was its usual measured instrument, but Kirk caught the precise calibration that Spock used when he was controlling something. The whole registry, partially visible on enhanced imaging, reads SS Botany Bay. The bridge went quiet in the way that bridges go quiet when everyone hears a name they recognize. Sulu's hands had stopped moving on the helm console. Chekhov had turned from his station. Even Uhura had lowered her earpiece. Kirk stood at the center of it, and felt something cold and specific settle into his chest. Not fear, exactly, but the particular sensation of a door opening that he had hoped would stay closed. Clark had moved to stand beside Spock's station. He wasn't looking at the view screen. His head was slightly tilted, his eyes distant in the way Kirk had already learned meant he was using one of the senses that didn't show up on any of McCoy's instruments. "There are people in there," Clark said quietly. "Dozens of them. Their heartbeats are slow, maybe one beat every 40 seconds, but they're strong. Very strong." He paused. "One of them is different. His heart rate is faster than the others. Not much, but measurably. Like he's already beginning to surface." His eyes refocused. He looked at Kirk. Whatever process keeps them asleep, it's failing for him. He'll be fully conscious within the hour. Kirk looked at Spock. "Consistent with cryo-unit degradation over extended periods," Spock said. "The Botany Bay has been adrift longer than anticipated. Ceti Alpha V's orbital mechanics may have affected the ship's trajectory." He paused. "Admiral, if Khan awakens without a controlled revival protocol, the disorientation alone could be dangerous. He will have no context for his current situation. No information about how much time has passed. He will wake believing that he's exactly where he was when he went under," Kirk said. "He was already calculating options. We could beam a security team aboard to manage the revival under controlled conditions," Spock said. "Or we could allow the natural awakening to proceed and attempt communication from a safe distance." A brief pause. "A third option exists. We could accelerate the revival of the remaining sleeper units simultaneously, which would distribute Khan's immediate authority and reduce the likelihood of—" "That third option," Clark said, with the careful tone of someone identifying something before it became irreversible, "assumes Khan's authority over the others is the primary threat." He looked at the view screen, at the slow tumbling shape of the Botany Bay against the stars. "What if it isn't?" Kirk looked at him. "What do you mean?" Clark met his eyes. "What if the primary threat is what Khan becomes when he wakes up and finds out what happened to Ceti Alpha V?" The bridge was very quiet. Kirk turned back to the view screen and stared at the Botany Bay for a long moment with the expression of a man watching a fuse burn towards something he built himself. "Mr. Sulu," he said. "All stop. Mr. Chekhov, begin transport protocols." We're going aboard. Kirk had boarded derelict vessels before. The particular atmosphere of a ship that had been sealed and drifting carried its own unmistakable character. Recycled air gone stale and metallic, the faint chemical signature of preservation systems running on minimal power, the almost geological stillness of a place where time had been deliberately suspended. The Botany Bay had all of that, and something else beneath it. A human warmth that the cryo-units still produced, faint as a whisper, that reminded you the sleeping figures in their frost-rimmed chambers were not cargo. Kirk led the boarding party through the main corridor with Spock at his left and Clark at his right. 4 security officers followed in a tight formation. The emergency lighting had activated on their entry, dim amber panels that turned the corridor into something that felt like the inside of an old photograph. Clark moved differently in the confined space than he had on the Enterprise. Not awkwardly. He was too physically precise for awkward, but with a deliberate containment, as though he was consciously calibrating the force of every step to avoid damaging a floor that was never built to hold someone like him. Kirk noticed it and filed it away. A being of that power choosing to be careful in a fragile environment said something significant about character. "He's in the primary revival chamber," Clark said quietly, his eyes tracking something invisible to everyone else. "Forward section. His heart rate has increased again in the last 4 minutes. He's dreaming, REM patterns, rapid eye movement visible through the cryo-unit viewport." A pause. "The dreams don't look peaceful." They found Khan Noonien Singh in the chamber marked with the registry designation of the ship's commanding officer. Naturally, inevitably, because Khan had never in his life occupied any position except the first position. The cryo-unit was larger than the others, its housing more elaborate, its status display showing the cascading amber warnings of a revival sequence that had begun without human initiation. Kirk stood in front of the viewport and looked at the face inside. 15 years had passed. Khan looked exactly the same, which was, Kirk reflected, precisely the point of genetic engineering. The strong jaw, the imperious brow, the face of a man who had been designed to look like authority incarnate. Even unconscious, even behind frosted transparasteel, Khan Noonien Singh projected the particular gravity of someone who expected the universe to organize itself around him. The revival sequence completed with a soft mechanical exhale. The cryo-unit opened. Khan's first breath was deep and controlled, not the gasping disorientation of a normal human revival, but the deliberate inhalation of a man who had decided even the act of waking up would be executed with precision. His eyes opened. Dark, sharp, immediately present. They moved across the ceiling, the amber lighting, the Starfleet uniforms, and stopped on Kirk with the focused stillness of a targeting system achieving lock. "Admiral Kirk," Khan said. His voice was rough from disuse but carried within 3 words to its natural register, deep, measured, faintly theatrical in the way of men who had always known their words would be recorded. "You have aged. 15 years will do that," Kirk said. Khan sat up slowly, taking inventory of himself with the clinical efficiency of someone running a diagnostic. He flexed his hands, rolled his shoulders, assessed his own physical state with the detachment of an engineer inspecting a machine. Then his eyes moved past Kirk and found Clark. The stillness that came over Khan's face was different from his usual composure. It was the stillness of genuine surprise encountering a mind fast enough to immediately begin processing it into tactical information. Clark met his gaze without expression. "You are not Starfleet," Khan said. "No," Clark said. "Your physiology." Khan's eyes moved across Clark with the rapid precision of a man whose engineered intellect processed visual information the way a computer processed sensor data. "The musculature. The stance. The way you entered this room, you accommodated the structural limitations of this vessel, which means you are aware that your physical force exceeds its tolerances." He paused. "You are enhanced. Beyond anything the Federation's current science could produce." A longer pause. "Beyond anything even my creators attempted." "I'm not enhanced," Clark said. "I'm just from somewhere else." Something moved behind Khan's eyes. A calculation completing, a door opening onto a corridor he found immediately interesting. From somewhere else, Khan repeated. He looked at Kirk. You brought a being of extraordinary physical capability aboard a vessel carrying my people, Admiral. I am trying to decide whether that represents a threat display or an olive branch. It represents a coincidence, Kirk said. One that complicates what I came here to tell you. Khan waited. The patience of a man who had learned, across a lifetime of engineered superiority, that information delivered under duress was more revealing than information delivered freely. Kirk told him about SETI Alpha 6. The orbital shift. The planetary catastrophe. The conditions on SETI Alpha V that would have made the world he'd been exiled to virtually uninhabitable within years of his marooning. He watched Khan's face as he spoke. The face of a man receiving information that reconfigured everything, not just the 15 years of isolation, but the nature of that isolation, the suffering it had produced, what it had cost. Kirk had seen grief before in all its manifestations. What moved across Khan's features was something older and colder than grief, the particular expression of a man in whom loss had long since been converted into something more durable and more dangerous. My people, Khan said. We don't know the current status of my people, Khan said again, and the two words carried a weight that made two of the security officers shift their grip on their phasers. Clark stepped forward, not aggressively, not interposingly, but with the quiet deliberateness of someone placing himself where he could be seen. What happened to your people was a catastrophe, he said. Not a choice. Not a punishment. A catastrophe. His voice was even and direct. I understand that distinction may not matter to you right now, but it will matter to what you do next. Khan looked at him for a long time. You understand loss, Khan said. Not a question. I'm the last survivor of my world, Clark said. The chamber was very quiet. Somewhere in the corridor behind them, another cryo-unit was beginning its unscheduled revival cycle, then another. The cascade of failing preservation systems moving through the Botany Bay like a slow wave, waking the army of enhanced humans that Khan had carried across the decades in frozen suspension. Khan rose from the cryo-unit to his full height and looked at Clark with an expression that had moved past calculation into something that might, in a different man, have been called respect. Then you know, Khan said quietly, that survival is not the same thing as living. And that a man who has lost everything, his eyes moved to Kirk, has nothing left to lose. The next 6 hours were the most delicate of Kirk's command career, and his command career included a negotiation conducted entirely in metaphor with a species that had no other language. Khan's people revived in sequence, 72 enhanced humans emerging from cryosleep into the amberlit corridors of the Botany Bay with the controlled, dangerous energy of a force that had been compressed for 15 years and was now, incrementally, decompressing. They were disciplined. That was the first thing Kirk noted, and it was not reassuring in the way discipline usually was. Their discipline was Khan's discipline, the precise, hierarchical order of people who had been engineered to function as a unified instrument under a single will. They took their cues from Khan entirely, watching him the way a ship's crew watches a captain during a crisis, and Khan was watching Clark. Kirk had positioned himself in the Botany Bay's main assembly area with Spock beside him, and the security team deployed at the exits, visible, professional, phasers holstered. A display of measured confidence rather than threat. Spock had communicated their situation to the Enterprise in compressed subspace bursts, additional security teams on standby transport, Dr. McCoy preparing revival medical support, Sulu holding position with shields at standby. Clark stood at ease near the center of the assembly area, and Kirk watched Khan watch him with the focused patience of a chess player 3 moves ahead of his opponent, and content to wait. You want to recruit him, Kirk said to Khan, quietly enough that the words didn't carry to the assembled enhanced humans taking water and ration supplements from Enterprise crew members in a scene of deeply strange, carefully managed civility. I want to understand him, Khan said, with the precision of a man who found imprecise language offensive. Recruitment follows understanding. I do not recruit tools. I recruit allies. He glanced at Kirk. There is a difference. You, of all people, should appreciate it. He's not going to be your ally, Kirk said. You're very certain of that. I've spent 8 hours with him. Yes. Khan was quiet for a moment. Across the room, Clark was crouching to examine something on the Botany Bay's deck plating, a stress fracture from the ship's long years of unguided drift. With the focused attention he gave to everything, his hand tracing the crack with a gentleness that seemed almost incongruous. 2 of Khan's people were watching him. Their expressions had moved from wariness to something closer to fascination. He is a paradox, Khan said. Power of that magnitude, deployed with that degree of restraint. In my experience, restraint at that level is either genuine moral conviction or performance. A pause. I find I cannot determine which. It's genuine, Kirk said. Your certainty is touching, Admiral. Khan's voice carried no particular warmth. It is also, I suspect, based on the same instinct that led you to exile me on a planet whose neighbor was about to destroy it. He looked at Kirk directly. Your instincts about people are not infallible. Kirk had no answer for that wasn't an acknowledgement, so he said nothing, and Khan moved away toward where his senior lieutenants had gathered near the forward bulkhead. Spock appeared at Kirk's shoulder with the quiet materialization of a man who had spent decades practicing the art of arriving exactly when needed. The situation is stable, Spock said. For the moment. For the moment, Kirk agreed. Khan has not made any aggressive action. His people are following his restraint. Spock paused. He is, I believe, waiting to see how Clark responds to him before committing to a course of action. Clark represents an unknown variable that Khan's considerable strategic intelligence has not yet fully solved. Which means as long as Clark is in the room, Khan stays curious instead of dangerous. Essentially correct. Kirk looked across the room to where Clark had straightened from his examination of the deck plating and was now in quiet conversation with one of Khan's people, a tall woman with the same engineered physicality as the others, who was listening with an expression of wary interest. Clark was speaking and gesturing with the open, patient quality of someone explaining rather than persuading. The woman's expression shifted. Not to agreement, exactly, but to something that was no longer purely defensive. Clark had an ability, Kirk realized, that had nothing to do with Kryptonian solar absorption or enhanced cellular density. He had the ability to make people feel seen without making them feel studied. It was different from Kirk's own considerable charisma. Kirk's charm operated through projection, through the force of his own conviction radiating outward. Clark's operated through attention, through the visible act of actually listening, which in Kirk's experience was considerably rarer and considerably more disarming. Then Khan approached Clark directly, and the room's ambient tension recalibrated upward by several degrees. Kirk didn't move toward them. Spock's hand was near his communicator. Khan stopped 2 meters from Clark and studied him with the frank assessment of a man who had never learned to pretend he wasn't measuring someone. You are the last of your kind, Khan said. Yes, Clark said. Then you understand what it means to be responsible for a legacy that has no other guardian. Khan's voice had dropped to something that wasn't quite private but wasn't quite public either, the register of a man speaking truth he didn't perform for audiences. My people are all that remain of what we were meant to be. Every choice I make is not merely mine, it carries every one of them. Clark was quiet for a moment. I understand that weight, he said. I carry it too. Then help me carry mine. Khan's voice was even, direct, stripped of manipulation. Not for conquest. Not for revenge against the Federation that exiled us. For survival. For a world that belongs to my people where they can be what they are without fear of what Starfleet will do when they decide we're inconvenient again. Clark looked at him for a long time. I believe you mean that, Clark said finally. Right now, in this moment, I believe that's exactly what you want. He paused. But I've watched what happens when the most powerful person in the room decides their people's survival justifies every method. The road from here to what you're describing has turns in it that you haven't seen yet. And I can't help you navigate turns you won't acknowledge exist. Khan's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes did, a door closing on a calculation that had come back negative. Then we have nothing further to discuss, Khan said quietly. He turned away. And Kirk, watching from across the room, felt the 6 hours of careful stability tip towards something else entirely. The USS Reliant was a Miranda-class starship, smaller than the Enterprise but fast and well-armed, a capable vessel under competent command. Her captain, a Starfleet officer named Terrell, had been running a planetary survey assignment in the Matara sector for 3 weeks when Khan's people took her. They did it in 4 minutes. Kirk learned the details from Spock's subsequent analysis rather than from direct observation. By the time the Reliant seizure was complete, the Botany Bay had already separated from the Enterprise-S tether position under cover of a low-power thruster burn that the Enterprise-S sensors had categorized as passive drift correction. Khan had planned the separation during the 6 hours of apparent cooperation. He had used the time not to negotiate but to study. The Enterprise-S sensor sweep patterns, the transporter lock protocols, the security team deployment, the precise window of inattention that occurred during shift rotation. Kirk's instincts had been right. Khan had simply been faster. He used our good faith as operational cover, Kirk said, with the controlled quiet of a man who was not going to permit himself the luxury of anger when there was work to do. Accurate, Spock said. He identified the Reliant S survey position from the Botany Bay S long-range passive sensors, which we did not think to disable during the boarding. The Reliant was operating on minimal defensive posture consistent with a routine planetary survey. Khan's people transported aboard in a single coordinated wave. A pause. Captain Terrell and his first officer are alive. Khan requires experienced navigators. And the Genesis device? Kirk said. The pause that followed was half a second longer than Spock's usual response interval. Khan has accessed the Reliant S computer core. The Genesis project data, classified at the highest level, was accessible to a ship's captain with command codes. Captain Terrell's codes were obtained. Another pause. Khan now knows about Genesis. The bridge was very quiet. Clark stood at the back of the bridge near the turbolift, having said nothing since they'd received the alert. He was listening, to the ship, Kirk suspected, to the wider electromagnetic spectrum that his biology processed as naturally as breathing. His expression was focused in the particular way Kirk had learned to recognize as Clark running calculations he hadn't yet shared. "He'll use it," Clark said. Kirk turned. "Explain." "He's not going to use it the way it was designed, to create life, to terraform a dead world. He's going to use it as a weapon, or as a threat significant enough that the Federation cannot call his bluff without catastrophic consequences." Clark moved forward to the center of the bridge. "A man who just learned that the universe destroyed what he was given and left his people with nothing. He's not going to ask for a new home. He's going to take one. And he's going to make certain no one can stop him by holding something over their heads that they can't afford to lose." Genesis detonated in a populated system would, Chekhov began. "Destroy everything in it and replace it with a new biosphere within hours," Clark said. "I heard the briefing Dr. Marcus transmitted to your science station when you pulled the classified files. The Genesis wave doesn't discriminate between living and dead matter." He looked at Kirk. "Khan doesn't need to fire it. He just needs Starfleet to believe he will." Kirk stared at the view screen, where the Reliant was visible on long-range sensors, already moving, already accelerating toward the Mataran Nebula's outer boundary. Moving with purpose. Moving with the terrifying efficiency of a mind that had spent 15 years in suspended animation and emerged with every grievance intact and every strategic faculty sharpened by fury. "He's going into the nebula," Sulu said. "Warp 2 and accelerating." "The Mutara Nebula disrupts sensors and shields," Spock said. "Inside the nebula, the Reliant's inferior tactical systems become considerably less inferior. The plasma interference neutralizes our advantages in targeting and shielding. It is, tactically speaking, the optimal environment for a less powerful vessel to engage a more powerful one. He's been planning this since he woke up," Kirk said. "Since before he woke up, I suspect," Spock said. "The neural pathways of a man of Khan's intelligence continue processing even in cryosleep at reduced capacity. He has been, in some operational sense, planning this for 15 years. Kirk turned to Clark. "Can you intercept the Reliant before it reaches the nebula?" Clark looked at the sensor display. The Reliant was at warp 2 and climbing, 40 million kilometers and increasing. "Yes," he said simply. "And if you intercept it?" "I can stop it. Pull it out of warp if I have to." A pause. "But Khan will still be aboard with 72 enhanced humans and a Genesis device. Stopping the ship doesn't solve the problem. It just changes the location of it." "He's right," McCoy said from the back of the bridge, where he'd appeared during the alert without anyone noticing. "You can't just grab the ship, son. Khan doesn't surrender. 15 years of evidence on that point." Clark looked at Kirk. "What do you want to do?" Kirk turned back to the view screen and looked at the Reliant's retreating warp signature for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Kirk ran through every option, every angle, every leverage point and tactical alternative, and arrived at the same place he always arrived when the problem was Khan Noonien Singh. "You had to go in after him." "Pursuit course," Kirk said. "Warp 5. All hands to battle stations." He looked at Clark. "Stay close to the ship. Inside the nebula, I may need you where sensors can't guide you." Clark nodded once. "Understood." "And Clark..." Kirk paused. Something in his expression shifted, the command face giving way briefly to something more human and more honest. "Thank you for being straight with me. About Khan. About what he was going to do." Clark held his gaze for a moment. "You already knew," he said quietly. "You just needed someone to say it out loud." Kirk didn't deny it. He turned back to the helm. "Mr. Sulu," he said, "take us in." The Mutara Nebula swallowed the Enterprise the way all vast things consume small ones, gradually, then completely. The nebula's outer boundary registered as a deepening of color on the view screen, amber and violet plasma clouds thickening around the ship as Sulu held course at reduced warp, the engines cycling down to impulse as the interference built. The stars disappeared first. Then the clean geometry of deep space gave way to the churning, luminous murk of ionized gas clouds that moved with the slow, enormous patience of weather systems the size of solar systems. Inside the Mutara Nebula, the Enterprise was blind in the way that mattered most. Sensors that could detect a heartbeat at 40 million kilometers were now struggling to resolve contacts at 40,000. The deflector shields were cycling erratically. The plasma interference inducing fluctuations that Scotty was managing from engineering with the controlled urgency of a man keeping a patient stable rather than healthy. Phasers were functional but targeting was manual. Every tactical advantage the Enterprise carried into normal space had been surrendered at the nebula's threshold. Khan had chosen his battlefield with the precision of a military genius operating from a position of absolute fury. On the bridge, the atmosphere had the particular quality of a room where everyone understands the stakes and has chosen, collectively and silently, to be steady about it. Chekhov was running manual targeting calculations. Sulu had both hands on the helm with the focused attention he reserved for flying in conditions where the instruments couldn't be trusted. Uhura was cycling through frequencies looking for the Reliant's drive signature and the electromagnetic noise. Spock stood at his science station doing what Spock always did when technology failed, thinking. Clark was gone. He had exited through the ventral hull access port 17 minutes into the nebula transit, transitioning from the ship's atmosphere to the nebula's plasma environment with the casual ease of a man stepping from a warm room into a cool evening. He had told Kirk, before he left, that the nebula's electromagnetic interference affected his vision and hearing in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I can still see," Clark had said, "but not as far. The plasma scatters the light spectrum in ways my eyes have to compensate for. My hearing is fractured. I'm getting signals from every direction. It's like trying to listen to one conversation in a room where every surface is speaking." He had paused. "I can still function. I just want you to know I'm not operating at full capacity in here." Kirk had nodded. "Neither are we." Now Clark was outside the ship, moving through the plasma clouds on his own course, navigating by the modified sensory inputs of a biology that had never been designed for this environment, and was adapting to it in real time. From the bridge, his position was marked by a single transponder signal that Uhura was maintaining with heroic concentration against the nebula's interference. A small, steady pulse that said he's there, he's moving, he's alive. "Contact," Chekhov said, with the flat precision of a man reporting facts before his nervous system had time to process them. "Bearing 042 Mark 7. Reliant. Range, 12,000 kilometers. She's running without shields," Spock said from his station, his voice carrying the quality of a man reporting something that should have been reassuring but wasn't. "Inside the nebula, shield operation is as costly for her as for us. Khan has chosen to forego them entirely, maximizing weapon power at the expense of defense. He doesn't think he needs shields," Kirk said. "He may be correct. In these conditions, our ability to target his vessel precisely enough to inflict decisive damage is..." The Reliant fired. The first torpedo spread came out of the plasma clouds with almost no warning. The interference had reduced their sensor lead time to fractions of a second, and Sulu was already rolling the Enterprise on instinct before the targeting solution had even resolved. 2 torpedoes missed wide. The third caught the Enterprise's port nacelle housing with a concussive impact that sent a shudder through the entire ship and knocked Chekhov out of his chair. "Damage report," Kirk said, gripping the command chair. "Port nacelle secondary power conduits are severed," Spock said. "Warp capability reduced to warp 2 maximum. Hull breach on deck 7, emergency bulkheads sealed. Casualties, minor, 3 crew members." A pause. He was aiming for the nacelle specifically. "He wants us mobile but not warp capable. He wants us trapped in here with him," Kirk said. "Transponder contact on Clark," Uhura said. "He's moving toward the Reliant-S position. Fast." On the view screen, through the churning plasma clouds, something was moving, a shape that the sensors could barely resolve but that the human eye, trained by hours of observation, could identify. Clark was cutting through the nebula plasma on a direct intercept course for the Reliant, his form visible as a disturbance in the luminous gas, a wake of displaced plasma marking his trajectory like a comet trail. The Reliant saw him. Khan's response was immediate, and revealed something important. He had prepared for this contingency. The Reliant came about hard and accelerated, not away from Clark, but toward him. A torpedo fired at close range, detonating in Clark's path. The explosion expanded through the plasma in a sphere of blue-white energy that engulfed Clark's position entirely. The bridge held its breath. The transponder signal flickered. Held. Flickered again. Then Clark emerged from the dissipating explosion radius, his velocity reduced but his trajectory unchanged, his cape burning at the edges with the residual plasma energy, and then not burning, the material reconstituting itself as his cells processed the energy of the detonation and converted it into exactly the kind of solar spectrum radiation his body used for fuel. The torpedo had made him stronger. "Fascinating," Spock said, with genuine reverence. But the Reliant was already turning again, repositioning, and Khan's voice came over the open channel with the absolute composure of a man whose plan had not yet failed. "You brought a weapon, Admiral. I expected as much. But a weapon requires a wielder, and a wielder can be separated from his weapon." The Reliant fired again. Not at Clark, not at the Enterprise, but at the space between them, a sustained torpedo barrage that detonated in sequence, and created a wall of plasma fire and electromagnetic disruption that severed Clark's line of approach and, simultaneously, Uhura's transponder lock. The signal went dark. In the sudden silence, Kirk heard what Khan had actually just done. He hadn't tried to destroy Clark. He had isolated him. Cut him off from the Enterprise in an environment where Clark's senses were already compromised and every direction looked the same. In the Matara Nebula, without a reference point, even Superman could get lost. "Uhura," Kirk said. "Get that signal back." "Working, sir." "The interference is—" "Get it back." The Reliant was repositioning again in the plasma clouds, and this time it was heading not for Clark's last position but for the Enterprise. And it was accelerating with the deliberate, unstoppable momentum of a ship commanded by a man who had just removed the one variable he couldn't predict from the equation. Kirk made a decision in the space between two sensor sweeps. It was not the decision that regulation recommended, not the decision that a strictly tactical analysis would have produced, and not the decision that protected the most assets with the least risk. It was the decision that Kirk's 20 years of command had taught him was sometimes the only decision available when the enemy was smarter than your position and faster than your response time. He was going to let Khan come to him. "All stop," Kirk said. Sulu's hands hesitated on the helm for exactly the duration of his professionalism overriding his instincts. Then, "All stop, sir. Cut all non-essential power. Drop us to minimal emissions." Kirk's voice was level and quiet. "I want us to look like we're more damaged than we are." Spock moved from his station to Kirk's side with the unhurried certainty of a man who had followed this captain into enough impossible situations to recognize when the impossible was actually a specific kind of possible. "You intend to allow the Reliant to close to optimal torpedo range," Spock said. "Khan is a strategic genius operating from perfect fury," Kirk said. "He's anticipating a moving target. A damaged ship trying to evade, buying time, hoping for a miracle." He looked at the view screen. "We're going to give him a stationary target instead. And when he adjusts his firing solution for a stationary target, we are going to have approximately 4 seconds of his complete tactical commitment to that solution before he can adapt." 4 seconds, McCoy said from behind them. 4 seconds, Kirk confirmed. "That's a very thin margin, Jim. It's the margin we have, Bones." Spock returned to his station and began the quiet work of preparing a targeting solution that would have to be executed manually, in 4 seconds, against a moving vessel whose position was known only approximately through plasma interference. He did this without comment, which was how Spock expressed confidence in a plan he might otherwise have characterized as statistically precarious. The Enterprise went quiet. The hum of the engines subsided to a barely perceptible vibration. The bridge lighting dimmed to emergency levels. On the view screen, the Matara Nebula's plasma clouds moved in their slow, enormous patterns, and somewhere in them the Reliant was closing. Uhura kept working her board. "Still no transponder lock on Clark, sir. The plasma barrier Khan created is dispersing, but the residual interference—" She stopped. Her hand went to her earpiece. "Sir? I'm getting something. Not the transponder. Direct acoustic transmission through the hull." Kirk looked at her. 3 knocks, Uhura said. "Very deliberate. Very gentle." Kirk felt something release in his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "He's found the hull," he said. "He's navigating by contact. He may be able to hear the Reliant's approach through the hull plating," Spock said. "His acoustic sensitivity, even compromised by the nebula's interference, likely exceeds our sensor capability at current ranges. Can we communicate with him? Hull vibration transmission. Limited. But possible." Uhura was already working. "I can send a coded pulse sequence. Send him our heading and Khan's last known bearing," Kirk said. "And tell him." He paused, constructing the message he needed to fit into a series of hull vibration pulses. "Tell him to wait for my mark. Uhura transmitted. 7 seconds passed. Then 3 knocks came back through the hull, evenly spaced, and in the pattern that Clark had established in the first moments of contact as his signal for understood. The Reliant appeared on the view screen at 9,000 kilometers, emerging from a plasma cloud with her weapons powered and her course set for the stationary Enterprise with the clean, committed trajectory of a ship whose captain had made his decision. Khan had read the situation exactly as Kirk had intended: damaged vessel, minimal power, running out of options. Kirk watched the range decrease. 8,000 kilometers. 7. "He's opened the Genesis tube," Chekhov said, his voice very controlled. "The device is armed. He's not targeting us with it. He's holding it as a secondary option." A pause. "Sir, if we destroy the Reliant with Genesis armed and the containment breaches—" "I know," Kirk said. 6,000 kilometers. "Sir?" Sulu began. "I know," Kirk said again. "Wait." 5,000 kilometers. The Reliant's weapons were locked. On the view screen, she was visible now without sensor enhancement. A dark shape moving through luminous plasma, purposeful and inexorable. Khan's voice came over the channel one final time. "Kirk, I've done far worse than kill you. I've hurt you. And I wish to go on hurting you." 4,000 kilometers. "No," Kirk said. Sulu brought the Enterprise to full power in a single surge. Every system that had been running at minimum snapping to operational simultaneously, the warp engines cycling up, the phaser banks charging, the ship going from apparent derelict to fully operational warship in the time it took a targeting solution to resolve. Chekhov's hands moved on the manual targeting console with the speed and precision of a navigator who had been ready for this moment for 4 minutes. The Enterprise fired. The phaser barrage caught the Reliant across her engineering section with the full force of a broadside that Khan's repositioned tactical systems, committed to their firing solution for a stationary target, could only partially absorb. The Reliant shuddered and rolled, her port shields failing, secondary explosions walking across her hull as the phaser energy found conduit junctions and power relays. But Khan had his hand on the Genesis control. "No," Khan said, and his voice had lost its theatrical composure and found something beneath it, something raw and absolute and beyond tactical calculation. "No, you don't get to win. Not again. Not after everything." The Genesis device activated. The tube opened and the torpedo carrying the Genesis payload launched into the Mutara Nebula, and for 1 second, one extraordinary, terrible second, Kirk watched it go and understood with perfect clarity that no amount of tactical brilliance was going to be enough. Then something hit the Genesis torpedo at a velocity that the Enterprise's recovering sensors could barely track. A blue and red shape moving through the plasma clouds at a speed that made the torpedo look stationary, matching its trajectory, then exceeding it, then wrapping around the warhead casing with both hands and driving it away from the Enterprise, away from the Reliant, into the deep plasma clouds at the nebula's heart. Clark's transponder signal blazed back onto Uhura's board, burning bright and moving fast and accelerating. "He's driving it deeper into the nebula," Spock said. "Away from both vessels. Away from any inhabited system." A pause. "The detonation, when it occurs, will create a new planetary body in the nebula's interior. No inhabited world within." He calculated for 2 seconds. 12 light-years will be affected. "And Clark?" Kirk said. Spock's hands moved on his console. His face, angled toward the sensor hood, was entirely still. "Spock," Kirk said. "He is still moving," Spock said. "Accelerating. He is, attempting to outrun the Genesis wave's expansion radius." A pause that lasted long enough to feel like a different kind of answer. "The wave is expanding at a rate that exceeds." The nebula lit up. The Genesis detonation expanded through the plasma clouds in a wave of restructuring energy. Matter reorganizing at the fundamental level, the nebula's raw material becoming the substrate for a new world, the wavefront moving outward at a velocity that rewrote the space it passed through. On the viewscreen, the light was extraordinary, every color at once, a brightness that the viewscreen's filters struggled to manage, a spectacle of creation that was also, potentially, a death. The bridge was very quiet. Kirk stared at the viewscreen. His hands were on the command chair's armrests, and he was not aware of gripping them. "Come on," he said, very quietly, to no one in particular. The Genesis wave took 47 seconds to complete its primary expansion. Kirk counted them. The light on the viewscreen shifted from the blinding white of the initial detonation through amber and violet and deep blue as the wave front moved outward and the restructuring process settled into the slower, steadier work of planetary formation. The Mutaran Nebula, which had been a churning field of ionized gas and plasma for geological epochs, was reorganizing itself around a new gravitational center, a world being born in real time, matter finding its new configuration with the patient inevitability of physics following its deepest instructions. It was, objectively, one of the most extraordinary things Kirk had ever seen. He was not looking at it. He was looking at the sensor display above Spock's station, where Uhura had routed the transponder frequency, where a single pulse had been burning steadily for 40 seconds and then had gone dark at the moment of detonation and had not come back. "Spock," Kirk said. "Scanning," Spock said. His voice had the quality of complete professional control, which Kirk knew from long experience was not the same thing as complete personal control. "The Reliant?" Kirk said. "Disabled. Life signs present throughout the vessel, including Captain Terrell and his crew. Khan's people are." A pause. "Alive. Khan himself is alive. The Reliant's engineering section has lost all propulsion. She is adrift but intact." Another pause. "Khan is in the Reliant's command chair. He is not responding to hails." Kirk looked at the viewscreen, where the new planet was visible now, a sphere of rock and gas and early atmosphere glowing with the internal heat of its violent formation, orbiting the gravitational center that the Genesis wave had established in the nebula's heart. A world that had not existed an hour ago. A world that existed because Clark Kent had driven a doomsday weapon into the nebula's interior and held on. "Transponder," Kirk said. "Still scanning," Uhura said. Her voice was steady with the particular steadiness of a professional refusing to let the alternative into her voice until the data gave her no choice. "The Genesis wave created significant subspace eddies in the surrounding area. The interference is still resolving. Transponder signals in this frequency range would be..." "There," Spock said. One word. Spoken with the specific quality of a Vulcan who had spent decades learning to strip emotion from language and had not, in this moment, entirely succeeded. The transponder pulse on Uhura's board was faint, intermittent, cycling in and out of the interference with the fragile irregularity of a signal fighting to maintain coherence against conditions that were actively hostile to it. But it was there. A heartbeat of electromagnetic data, weak and inconsistent and unmistakably present. "Can you get a position fix?" Kirk said. "Working." Uhura's hands moved with precise speed. "The signal is, it's moving. Slowly. Bearing 271 Mark III, approximately 40,000 kilometers from the new planetary body." She looked up. "He's moving under his own power, sir. Very slowly. But he's moving." Kirk exhaled. "Helm," he said. "Take us to that bearing. 1/4 impulse." The Enterprise moved through the settling debris field of the Genesis event, through clouds of newly formed atmospheric compounds and the scattered remnants of the nebula's pre-formation matter, toward the transponder signal. The new planet turned slowly in the viewscreen's background, its surface still molten in places, its early atmosphere visible as a thin luminous shell against the dark. They found Clark at 38,000 kilometers from the planet's surface. He was alive. This was apparent before the sensors confirmed it, before the visual feed resolved him clearly, because the man floating in space against the backdrop of a newly born world was not in the posture of someone who had ceased to function. He was in the posture of someone who was very, very tired, suspended in the vacuum with his arms at his sides and his eyes closed and his cape gone entirely, burned away by the Genesis wave's passage, and his suit scored and darkened by energies that should have destroyed him and had instead merely, at some significant cost, failed to. His cellular energy readings, Spock reported in a quiet voice, were at approximately 12% of normal capacity. The Genesis wave's energy spectrum, Spock said, includes a significant component of restructuring radiation that operates on the subatomic level. Clark's cells absorb and process radiant energy, but the Genesis radiation was not purely solar spectrum. His body processed what it could and sustained damage from what it could not. He paused. He is recovering. His cells are already absorbing the residual yellow star radiation in this system. Given time. How much time? McCoy said. Hours. Possibly a day at full recovery. His baseline cellular density provides significant protection. What would have killed a human being or any known biological entity has left him depleted but functional. Spock looked up from his scanner. He will be all right, Doctor. McCoy was already moving to the transporter room before Spock had finished the sentence. They brought Clark aboard on a medical stretcher, not because he couldn't move, but because McCoy had arrived in the transporter room with the stretcher and an expression that foreclosed argument, and Clark, floating in the transporter beam with his eyes half open and his expression carrying the soft, unfocused quality of someone running on reserves, had not had the energy to object. In sickbay, McCoy ran his scans with the focused attention of a doctor who had decided that the impossibility of what he was looking at was going to be tomorrow's problem and today's problem was the patient. Kirk stood at the bedside and watched Clark's vital signs on the monitor above the bed. The readings that McCoy had recalibrated twice because the standard parameters kept defaulting to critical on a biology that was simply operating differently from anything the instruments had been designed for. Clark's eyes opened fully after 11 minutes. He looked at the sickbay ceiling for a moment, then at Kirk. "The ship?" he said. His voice was rough. "Intact," Kirk said. "Minor damage. No fatalities. The Reliant? Disabled. Khan and his people are alive. We're holding them under guard." Kirk paused. "Terrell and his crew are safe." Clark processed this with his eyes on the ceiling, his expression moving through something that might have been relief, or the aftermath of a significant decision finally resolved. Then, the Genesis wave. I couldn't contain it entirely. I pushed it as deep into the nebula as I could reach before. "You did enough," Kirk said. "More than enough." A silence. "Spock," Clark said. "Is he?" Kirk understood the question. It had come from something Clark had sensed, or suspected, or calculated in those final seconds before the detonation, the awareness that Spock had been moving toward the reactor, that the Enterprise's warp capability had been compromised in ways that traditional solutions might have required a sacrifice to solve. "Spock is at his station," Kirk said. "Running post-battle analysis. He's going to want to run 17 additional scans on your cellular recovery process, and I'd recommend letting him because it will give him something to do other than..." Kirk paused. "Other than process what almost happened?" Clark turned his head and looked at Kirk directly. "I tried to get to him," Clark said. "When I understood what he was going to do, I was already moving." "I know," Kirk said. "The wave hit before I could." "Clark." Kirk's voice was quiet and certain. "He's alive." "You're alive. We go from here." Clark held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the ceiling. His hand, resting on the sickbay bed, opened and closed once, a small, exhausted gesture that was somehow more human than anything a being of his power should have been capable of producing. "Khan," Clark said. "What happens to him now?" Kirk was quiet for a moment. Outside the sickbay viewport, the new Genesis planet turned in the dark. A world that had not existed when this day began, born from a weapon that had been intended for destruction and had been turned, by one man's choice to fly directly into the detonation, into something else. That, Kirk said, is a question for the Federation Council. And for Khan himself. He paused. For the first time in 15 years, he has a future that isn't already written. What he does with it. Kirk looked at the viewport. That's his. 3 days after the Genesis event, the Enterprise held position in the settling debris field of what Starfleet cartographers had already designated Genesis planet Matara 1, and Kirk sat in his command chair and wrote the most unusual log entry of his career. Khan Noonien Singh was in the Enterprise S brig, not a prisoner awaiting punishment, but a man awaiting a decision that the Federation Council was currently debating in emergency session on Earth. The debate, Uhura had informed Kirk with the particular tone she used for institutional absurdity, centered primarily on whether the Genesis planet constituted Federation territory, and if so, whether Khan's people had a legal claim to it as the only humanoids present at its formation. Kirk had transmitted his recommendation that the enhanced humans be offered settlement rights on the Genesis planet under a negotiated autonomy framework, with Federation observation but not Federation control, and had received in return the kind of response that indicated Starfleet brass was simultaneously impressed by his pragmatism and deeply uncomfortable with its implications. Khan had said nothing since his transfer to the Enterprise S brig. He had accepted food, water, and medical assessment with the composure of a man who had decided that this particular waiting period was not the end of anything. Kirk had visited him once. They had sat on opposite sides of the force field for 7 minutes without speaking. Then Khan had said, without preamble and without his usual theatrical register, "You're a man from another universe." He could have destroyed the Reliant. He chose not to. "Yes," Kirk said. "Why?" Kirk had considered the question. "Because destroying the Reliant would have killed your people. And that wasn't a cost he was willing to pay." Khan had been quiet for a moment. "Even after what we did?" "Even then." Another silence. Then Khan had said something that Kirk had not expected and had subsequently spent 2 days thinking about. "He is a better man than I am," Khan said. "I find I cannot entirely resent him for it." Kirk had not replied. There was nothing to add. Clark spent most of those 3 days in sickbay and then, as his cellular recovery accelerated, in the observation lounge at the Enterprise S stern. A room of curved transparent steel that looked directly out into the star field, which was where Spock found him on the morning of the 3rd day. Spock entered the observation lounge with 2 cups of Vulcan spice tea, a choice that Clark noted with the slight expression of a man who appreciated the gesture without having requested it, and sat across from him with the particular quality of stillness that distinguished Vulcan composure from the human variety. They sat in silence for a time, which suited them both. "You were moving toward the reactor," Clark said finally. "I was," Spock said. "The warp drive repair. The radiation exposure would have been fatal in all probability," Spock said. "The calculation was straightforward. The ship required propulsion capability to escape the Genesis wave radius. The repair required a presence in the reactor chamber that standard protective equipment could not adequately shield. Someone had to make the calculation." A pause. "I am accustomed to making calculations." Clark looked at him for a long moment. "I'm glad I got there in time." Spock held his gaze. "As am I," he said with the precise, careful honesty of a Vulcan who had decided that this particular sentiment warranted expression. "Though I will note that the alternative, your containment of the Genesis wave, produced an outcome that my calculation did not anticipate. You introduced a variable that rendered the sacrifice unnecessary." "I almost didn't make it." "Almost," Spock said, "is a significant word." Clark looked out at the stars, at the familiar patterns of a galaxy that was not his galaxy, whose constellations organized themselves differently from the ones he had grown up navigating by, whose species and histories and political geometries were variations on themes he recognized without being the themes themselves. Somewhere out there, beyond the galactic rim, was the dimensional rift that had brought him here. Beyond it was his universe, Lois, the daily planet, Metropolis, a world that needed him in ways he could quantify and ways he couldn't. I need to find my way back, Clark said. Yes, Spock said. We have been working on that problem. The dimensional barrier near the galactic rim. Our sensors have been tracking the residual energy signature of your crossing. It is detectable, though fading. I estimate a window of approximately 9 days before the rift collapses entirely. He paused. I have prepared navigational calculations. Clark looked at him. Something in his expression, something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it, acknowledged what the preparation of those calculations represented, what it meant that Spock had spent the last 3 days, alongside his post-battle analysis and his cellular recovery scans and his 17 examinations of Kryptonian biology, working on the problem of sending Clark home. Thank you, Clark said. Spock inclined his head. The Phantom Zone fragment you were searching for when you crossed through, he said. We have detected no anomalous Kryptonian energy signatures in this galaxy. It is possible the fragment was destroyed in the dimensional crossing. It is also possible it traveled further than your entry point. A pause. I would recommend returning home. If the fragment exists in this universe, it has been here longer than 11 days without causing detectable harm. It can be found through other means. Clark nodded slowly. You're telling me it's all right to go. I am telling you, Spock said carefully, that your presence here has already changed this quadrant in ways that will take time to fully understand. The Genesis planet exists because of your choice. Khan Noonien Singh is alive and his people are alive, and a future that was not available before you arrived is now, at least, possible. He paused. You have done sufficient work here, Clark. Go home. It was, Clark thought, the most complete thing anyone had said to him in 11 days. Kirk came to the shuttle bay in his dress uniform, which Clark noted without comment. Behind him were Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Sulu, and Chekhov, the complete senior staff of the USS Enterprise, standing in a line with the particular bearing of people who were not going to make a ceremony of something but were going to be present for it, which amounted to the same thing. Clark stood in his restored suit. Spock had declined to explain how the material had been repaired, and Clark had decided not to press, and looked at Kirk. No speeches, Clark said. Wasn't planning one, Kirk said. Good. Clark paused. Though if you're ever in my universe, I'll look for the flying man in the red cape, Kirk said. Clark smiled. It was the uncomplicated, full smile of a man who was, beneath every layer of power and responsibility and grief and duty, genuinely fond of the people he was looking at. He turned to Spock. The calculations? Spock produced a data card and held it out. Clark took it with the careful precision he used for all objects in this universe. McCoy stepped forward. You take care of yourself, son. Whatever that means for someone like you. His voice had the gruffness of a man who found emotional expression uncomfortable, and was doing it anyway. I will, Doctor, Clark said. He walked to the shuttle bay door, and paused with his hand on the frame. Outside was the star field, and the new Genesis planet turning in the middle distance, and the galactic rim that led home. Admiral, Clark said without turning. Yes? Kirk said. The choice you made 15 years ago. Giving Khan a world instead of a prison cell. Clark paused. It was the right choice. The execution was imperfect. But the choice was right. He looked back over his shoulder. Don't stop making choices like that. Kirk held his gaze for a moment. Live long and prosper, he said. Clark smiled once more. Then he stepped through the door into the black, and in a moment he was moving, the blue and red shape diminishing rapidly against the star field, accelerating toward the rim with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew exactly where he was going. The shuttle bay crew watched him until he was gone. Spock, standing at Kirk's left shoulder, watched the stars where Clark had been for 3 seconds after he disappeared. Remarkable, Spock said. Not fascinating. Not a clinical assessment. Remarkable. The word of a being who had genuinely encountered something worth the weight of that word. Kirk nodded. Said nothing. Then turned back toward the bridge with the walk of a captain who had a log entry to finish and a Federation council to argue with, and a disabled ship to repair and a future to navigate. Behind him, the stars held their positions, ancient, indifferent, and full of the extraordinary. The Enterprise log recorded the Mutara incident in 3 separate classified documents that Starfleet intelligence sealed within hours of transmission. The Genesis planet was designated a restricted zone pending council deliberation. Khan Noonien Singh and his people were transferred to a Federation arbitration facility, where negotiations over the Genesis world settlement would continue for 7 months before producing an agreement that no one considered perfect and everyone considered survivable. Spock filed a supplemental science report on Kryptonian cellular biology that filled 47 pages and concluded, in its final paragraph, that the entity designated Clark Kent represented the single most significant biological contact in Federation history, a finding that was also classified, because Starfleet had not yet developed a framework for what to do with information that large. Kirk's personal log, unclassified, said only this. Met a man today who reminded me why the Prime Directive exists, and why it is sometimes insufficient. He had more power than anything we've encountered and used it in the service of something larger than himself. That combination, in my experience, is the rarest thing in any universe. I hope his is worth going back to. Somewhere near the galactic rim, a dimensional barrier flickered and opened, and a figure in blue and red passed through it at a velocity that instruments on both sides would have struggled to measure, carrying the navigational mathematics of a Vulcan science officer and the memory of a crew that had trusted him when they had every reason not to. Out here, hope travels faster than warp. He had meant it when he said it. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching.